The wind tore through the valley like it had a purpose, to strip flesh from bone, to drag the past into the present, to punish the foolish who dared call this land home. It howled across the snow-packed plains of Montana Territory, 1874, snarling, between the skeletal trees and rattling the wooden slats of a weary cabin standing alone on a distant hill. Smoke rose weakly from its crooked chimney, a desperate signal in a world grown deaf to suffering. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long flickering shadows across the face of a man who hadn't slept in 2 nights. Thomas Avery sat at the edge of the hearth, boots cracked and blackened from frost, eyes rimmed red from smoke and memory. In one hand, he held a splintered carving of a bird, unfinished, like everything else in his life now. In the other, he held nothing at all. Behind him, on a thin mattress against the far wall, a boy lay curled beneath patchwork quilts. Caleb was 6, quiet, observant, too still for a child his age. His breath fogged in the cold air every few moments, and he clutched a ragged, leather-bound book to his chest. Pilgrim's Progress, the only story his mother ever read to him. She was gone now. Eliza had died in late October, when the first snow came early and heavy, sneaking into her lungs like a thief. Thomas had dug her grave himself, hands numb, blood freezing to the shovel's worn handle. He had buried her beneath the cottonwood tree out back, where her favorite red flowers once bloomed every spring. Now the tree stood stripped, like the man inside the cabin, bare, wind-beaten, barely living. Thomas rose stiffly. His joints ached. He checked the fire, tossed in the last piece of dry pine, and crossed to the window. He scraped away frost with the back of his hand. The world outside was white, choked in snow so deep it swallowed fence posts. The sky hung low and gray, like wet wool draped across the heavens. He hadn't seen another soul in months. Just the wolves, gaunt and tireless, and crows. Dozens of them circling above the tree line, black specks against the endless white. He heard a cough behind him. Caleb stirred. "Morning," Thomas said, his voice rough as gravel. The boy didn't reply. He turned the book over in his hands, not looking up. "You hungry?" Thomas asked. Still silence. Caleb rolled to his side, pulling the quilt over his shoulder. Thomas didn't blame him. There hadn't been much food for days. He rationed the cornmeal and dried beans down to the ounce. The trap lines had been empty for a week. Even the rabbits had fled the cold. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow, pulling his coat tighter around his frame. It was patched in 5 places. The buttons didn't match. But it was warm enough. He had more important things to worry about. He walked to the woodshed. The wind bit through his gloves as he pried the latch open. Empty. Only a few brittle sticks leaned in the corner. They'd burn for 10 minutes, maybe. His gaze shifted to the trees beyond. The forest yawned open like a throat ready to swallow him whole. He hesitated only a second before setting off, rifle slung over his shoulder, steps crunching through the drift. He moved quickly, eyes scanning for prints, rabbit, deer, anything. The silence was absolute. His breath sounded too loud. Then something caught his eye. Not tracks, something else. A pattern in the snow, uneven, dragging. Not made by hooves or paws. He crouched low, brushing snow aside. Fabric threads. Tiny droplets, brownish red. Blood. He followed. The trail led him deeper into the woods, past twisted pines and frost-covered ferns. The wind lessened under the canopy, but the cold still seeped into his bones. The tracks grew messier, more frantic. Whoever made them had stumbled, crawled, maybe collapsed. Then he saw it, a heap of brush. No, a structure. Branches arranged, crude and hastily built. Beneath it, something moved. He raised his rifle, approaching slowly. A hand emerged from the shadows, small, trembling, coated in frost. Then a voice, hoarse and broken. "Please, please." Thomas pushed the branches aside and stared. A woman. Face sunken, lips blue, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. She cradled something against her chest. No, 3 somethings. Children. Curled tight against her body. Silent. Not sleeping, just still. He stepped closer. One of the children, a girl no older than 4, blinked slowly, lips cracked and bleeding. The other 2 did not stir. "I'm not going to hurt you," Thomas said, lowering the rifle. The woman looked at him, eyes glassy. They haven't eaten in days." Her voice cracked on the last word. Thomas crouched, heart hammering. "Where's your husband?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Where were you going?" "Anywhere." Her eyes welled. "He left us. He said there'd be shelter. There wasn't." Thomas studied her. Skin raw from windburn, fingernails broken. The triplets, barely conscious. One had no shoes. "Can you walk?" She didn't reply. He reached out, gently taking one child from her arms. The girl's head lolled, light as kindling. He wrapped the child in his coat and helped the woman to her feet. She stumbled. He steadied her. "We're going to my cabin," he said. She nodded once, then went limp in his arms. It took him an hour to get them back. Inside the cabin, Caleb sat up, eyes wide as the door burst open. Thomas stumbled in, snow clinging to his beard, arms full of child. "Clear the bed," he barked. The boy obeyed without question. Thomas laid the girls down gently, pulling every blanket they had over them. He grabbed the kettle, filled it with snow, set it on the fire. Caleb crept closer. "Who are they?" "I don't know yet." He turned to the woman, who now lay against the wall, eyes fluttering. "What's your name?" he asked. She coughed, struggled. "Mara." Thomas nodded. "All right, Mara. You and the girls rest. We'll get some heat in you." She clutched his sleeve suddenly. "Thank you." Her grip was surprisingly strong. Then she let go and her head dropped to the side. Night came fast. Thomas fed them broth, thin and watery, but warm. The girls barely swallowed. Mara took only a few sips. He dressed their frostbite with lard and cotton. It wasn't much, but it was something. He sat at the window late into the night, eyes scanning the dark woods. Snow still fell, slow and quiet now. But something gnawed at him. He hadn't imagined that blood. Something had driven them out there. Caleb dozed beside the fire. The girls whimpered in their sleep. Mara murmured once, then fell silent. Thomas closed his eyes. He thought of Eliza, of the last thing she'd said. "Don't close yourself off, Tom. Don't become a ghost." He hadn't understood it then. Now, as the wind softened outside and new breath filled the little cabin, he did. He wasn't alone anymore, and that terrified him more than anything. The cabin was quieter now, but the quiet wasn't peace. It was the hush that came after a storm, fragile and uncertain. Mara lay on the cot beside the hearth, her face pale and drawn, framed by tangled dark hair damp with sweat. The triplets, Lila, June and Ivy, huddled together beneath a pile of blankets, their tiny chests rising with shallow breaths. Caleb sat on the floor near them, clutching a wooden carving shaped like a bear, watching the strangers as if waiting for them to disappear like a dream. Thomas moved through the room with deliberate care, avoiding sudden noises, avoiding questions. He wasn't ready to ask. He refilled the kettle and stirred the fire back to life, his eyes flicking to Mara now and then. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Her skin still held a waxy sheen, and her lips trembled even in sleep. He knew the signs. She was running on the edge, her body barely holding on. When she finally stirred, it was with a start, jerking upright, wide-eyed, her hands searching the bed. She saw the girls and exhaled, one hand rising to her mouth in a soundless prayer. Her eyes then locked on Thomas. "You brought us back," she said, voice raspy. "You were freezing to death, didn't have much choice." She nodded slowly, wincing as she shifted her weight. "They're alive?" she asked, barely breathing the words. "For now," They need food, rest. One's got blisters on her feet. She'd gone too long without shoes. She looked down, her jaw tightening. We lost them crossing a stream. I carried all three. Couldn't carry shoes too. You shouldn't have been out there, he said, not unkindly. We had no choice, she whispered. He didn't. Press. She looked like someone who'd already said her story too many times and hadn't been believed once. Caleb brought over a cup of weak broth, holding it out with both hands. Mara looked at him with something like awe. She took the cup carefully. Thank you, she said softly. He gave her a small nod, then scurried back to his corner. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed opposite her, resting his elbows on his knees. Where were you headed? West, she said. Anywhere west. My husband. She stopped. Her throat worked as she swallowed. He died. There was a man, a preacher, said he'd help, promised food, land, shelter. He took us with him and left us 2 days later with nothing but a blanket and a lie. Thomas's jaw tightened. You followed a stranger? We were starving. He spoke of the Lord, wore a cross, fed the girls stew, and prayed over them. I wanted to believe, I needed to. He didn't judge her. He'd seen good men lose themselves for less. I buried 2 people last winter, he said after a pause. My wife, and the man I used to be. Her gaze softened. I'm sorry. He stood, walked to the window. Snow still blanketed the land, but the sky was brighter now, blue bleeding in behind the clouds. You can stay here a few days, he said, till they've got strength. She nodded. Will be no trouble. I can work. So, cook. I'll repay. It's not about that. She looked down at her girls. It always is. The days that followed moved slowly, like winter thawing. Mara didn't ask questions. She swept the floor, stitched the torn curtains, and boiled water for washing. She said little, but her presence filled the cabin in a quiet, unobtrusive way, like a song remembered from childhood. The girls recovered in stages. Lila was the first to smile, her teeth missing in places, her cheeks still hollow but pink again. June followed, quieter, more curious. Ivy remained still for longest, clinging to her mother or her sisters and never speaking. Caleb didn't mind them. He shared his books and his drawings, showing them how to hold a pencil or build a toy horse from pine scrap. At night, Thomas sat by the fire, carving and listening. Mara would hum sometimes, almost involuntarily, while brushing the girls' hair or folding blankets. Her voice was low and haunting, like something from another life. It stirred something in him, something uncomfortable and warm. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Mara sat near the fire, turning a scrap of leather in her hands. Her eyes caught the glow of the flame, and she didn't look up when she spoke. I used to teach music. Before all this. Thomas looked up from his carving. Piano, mostly, she continued. Back east, Virginia. My husband was a surveyor. We lived near the Shenandoah. He waited. When the war came, we ran. Towns changed overnight. People we trusted looked at us different. He signed on with a caravan west. We thought we'd find something new out here. Did you? No, we lost things instead. The fire crackled between them. He studied her. Shoulders tense, voice level, but something deep in her looked fractured like cracked porcelain. Why didn't you go back east? He asked. There's nothing left there either. Not for me. Silence settled between them. Again, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. Later that night, Thomas stepped outside to chop wood. The moon hung full and silent above the trees. The wind had quieted. He split logs with a rhythm honed by repetition, each strike echoing into the woods. Then he paused. There, on the horizon, a faint plume of smoke. Not his. Too far. Too high. He narrowed his eyes. The nearest homestead had been abandoned since the fall. Nothing should be out there. He marked its direction, filed it away, and carried the wood back inside. The next morning, He found Caleb and Lila sitting together, sketching, in the corner. Mara was at the stove stirring something into a pot. It smelled faintly of squirrel meat and pine mushrooms. He approached her quietly. "Something's out there." She turned. "What do you mean?" "Smoke. Northeast ridge. Someone's camped close." She paled. "How close?" 5, maybe 6 miles. Could be a hunter. Could be trouble. Her hands trembled as she stirred. "Was it him?" he asked. She nodded slowly. Thomas stared. "The preacher. He always said he'd come back for us. He thinks I know where he buried the rest of it." "Buried what?" "Gold. Stolen. From wagons he ambushed under the name of the Lord. He killed those families, buried their things, said he'd return when the snow melted." Thomas's stomach turned. "And you know this?" "I heard him confess. One night drunk near the fire. I was too afraid to run then. Now he thinks I'm a witness." He stepped back. "You brought that here." "I didn't mean to." He took a long breath, held it, then let it go. "We'll handle it." "How?" "We prepare, fortify the cabin, keep the children inside. If he comes close, we drive him off." She looked at him then, not with fear, but with something older, deeper. "Trust." "I don't want you hurt," she said. "I've already been hurt." He left it at that. For the next 2 days they worked in silence. Thomas reinforced the windows with extra planks. Mara stuffed cracks in the walls with old rags. Caleb kept the girls occupied, reading stories and helping them sort pebbles by size and color. Mara rarely rested, but he caught her watching the woods from the window more than once, eyes sharp, body taut like a bowstring. Then, on the 3rd morning, they heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Not 1 set, 2, maybe 3. Thomas moved Caleb and the girls into the root cellar with a blanket and a lantern. Mara clutched a kitchen knife in one hand, her knuckles white. He stood near the door, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the knob. But the footsteps faded. No knock, no sound. Just the creak of branches in the wind and the slow melt of ice dripping from the eaves. When he opened the door, the woods were empty, but something fluttered in the wind. A scrap of parchment nailed to a post. He took it down and read the message, scrawled in rough, angry lines. "You're sheltering what's mine. Give her up, or I take it all." Beneath it, a crude symbol, crossed arrows. Thomas closed the door, gently, and turned to face her. "They've found you," he said. Mara didn't cry. She didn't plead. She stepped forward, jaw set, voice low. "Then we stand our ground." Thomas nodded, and for the first time in months, he felt something rise. In him, not grief, purpose. The morning broke slow and cold. Frost clung to the trees like a ghost reluctant to leave, and the wind whispered low through the pines. Inside the cabin, the air was still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Thomas stared at the parchment nailed to the post again, turning it in his fingers until the edges began to fray. The threat scrawled in that ragged handwriting wasn't just real, it was coming. He found Mara at the back table sharpening a knife, her eyes glazed over with focus, her motions fluid and practiced. She didn't look up when he entered. Her hands moved in a rhythm that matched the storm inside her. Controlled, determined, but full of fear, she refused to speak aloud. "They won't wait long," Thomas said. "I know," she replied. He glanced toward the root cellar. The children were still sleeping, bundled in blankets, unaware of the tension that thickened with every passing minute. Caleb had taken to keeping a small hammer in his coat pocket just in case. The boy wasn't old enough to fight, but he had his father's sense, keen, alert, brave in ways that only grief could shape. Thomas opened the cabinet under the hearth and pulled out his revolver. It was old, the metal worn smooth from years of use, but it fired true. He checked the cylinder. 5 bullets left. Not enough. Not for what was coming. He sat at the table across from Mara. "When he comes, he won't be alone." She stopped, sharpening. There were 2 others with him. They called him Shepherd. He preached while they tied men up and took what they wanted. Thomas nodded. Bandits with a Bible. Worse. They think God wants them to punish the rest of us. He stood and walked to the window. The ridge loomed in the distance, silent and white. He knew every path in and out of that forest. If Shepherd and his men were smart, they'd wait for nightfall. If they were arrogant, they'd come before sunset. They didn't have until sunset. Thomas stepped outside and began setting traps around the perimeter, tripwires, sharp stakes buried beneath snowdrifts, and bells strung from branches. It wasn't much, but it would buy them time, maybe even scare the men enough to hesitate. Mara joined him after a while, placing flat stones under the snow by the front door to prevent slipping. They worked side by side without words. Their movements, synced, natural, as if they'd done this together 100 times before, as if they were no longer strangers drawn together by misfortune, but something else, something forged in quiet alliance. By midday, the clouds thickened. The temperature dropped. It wasn't snowing yet, but the scent of it hung in the air, the calm before a storm. Back inside, Thomas showed Mara how to shoot his rifle. Her hands trembled slightly, but her grip was firm. She listened without interrupting, nodding at every instruction. She had the stare of someone who'd lost everything and would burn the world down before she lost more. "I don't want the girls to see this," she said. "They won't. Not if we can help it." She looked at him, her jaw clenched. "But if we can't?" Thomas met her gaze, holding it. "Then we make sure it's fast." She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. As dusk approached, the silence deepened. Even the birds had gone still. The wind died down, and the snow began to fall, thin, silent flakes like ashes from a fire long dead. Then came the sound, hooves, slow, deliberate, approaching from the east. Thomas stepped outside, rifle in hand, and saw them emerge from the trees like shadows. 3 men on horseback. The one in front wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that dripped melted snow onto his shoulders. A wooden cross hung from his neck, and his beard was matted, crusted with old blood. His eyes were cold and clear, like ice that never melted. "Evening," the man called. His voice rang out too calm, too practiced. Thomas didn't answer. "You have something of mine," the man continued. "I don't have anything that belongs to you," Thomas replied. "Woman, 3 girls. You're keeping what doesn't belong to you." Thomas raised the rifle. "They belong to no one." The preacher smiled, slow and easy. "I'll give you till nightfall. Hand her over. Walk away clean." Thomas said nothing. The preacher tipped his hat. "I'm a man of God. I forgive easily, but I don't forget." They turned and rode off, disappearing like smoke into the trees. Thomas stepped back inside. Mara stood behind the door, eyes wide. "They're giving us till nightfall." She nodded. "Then we don't wait." "What do you mean?" "We strike first." Thomas stared. "It's suicide." "No," she said. "It's the only way." She pulled out a small piece of folded paper from her skirt. A rough map, drawn by hand. Lines and arrows and tiny X's. She spread it on the table. "I remember where they camped before, when he abandoned us. If we circle through the gorge, we can flank their position." "And leave the cabin unguarded?" "I'll go," she said. "Alone." "No," Thomas said sharply. "You have Caleb and the girls to protect. I know the preacher. He won't expect me to fight. He thinks I'm still scared." Thomas looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the scared widow who stumbled into his home, but a different woman entirely. Someone shaped by fire and loss and fury. Someone willing to burn her past to keep her daughter safe. "We go together," he said. "We end this together." Under the cover of twilight, they moved like ghosts through the forest. Caleb stayed behind, hidden in the cellar with the girls, a pistol tucked into his belt, and orders not to open the trap door for anyone but his father. Thomas and Mara followed the gorge, the snow muffling their footsteps. The map led them to a hollow where smoke curled lazily above the trees. They spotted the camp, A fire, 2 tents, and 3 horses tied to a branch. One of the men was asleep, slumped against a log. Another cleaned a rifle. Shepard knelt near the fire, muttering. To himself, Thomas whispered, "We wait until they're distracted." But Mara didn't wait. She stepped forward, bold and silent, slipping through trees like a shadow. Before he could stop her, she threw a stone into the woods opposite their position. The rifleman turned at the sound just long enough for Thomas to fire. The crack of the shot shattered the quiet. The man dropped. The sleeping one scrambled to his feet, too late. Mara charged him, blade in hand, and slashed across his chest. He screamed and stumbled back, blood already darkening his coat. Shepard spun toward the noise, pulling a pistol from his belt. "Mara," he shouted. "You ungrateful witch!" Thomas fired again. The shot grazed Shepard's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Then there was silence. Mara stood over the bleeding man, her knife trembling in her grip. "You left us to die," she said. "You were weak," Shepard spat. "I offered salvation. You offered graves." She pressed the knife to his throat. Thomas approached slowly, watching her. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I do," she whispered. Shepard smirked, blood on his teeth. "Even if you kill me, there'll be others. There are always others." Mara didn't flinch. "I'm not killing you for revenge," she said. "I'm doing it so my girls can sleep without nightmares." The blade flashed once. Clean. Quick. It was over. They burned the camp, scattering ashes into the snow, and led the horses back toward the cabin. The stars broke through the clouds, and for the first time in days the wind was quiet again. When they returned, Caleb opened the trap door. With wide eyes, the girls clung to Mara, their small arms wrapping around her like vines. Thomas looked out at the dark forest, rifle still in hand. "I don't think it's over," he said. "It's not," Mara replied. "But now we're not alone." He turned to her. "No," he said. "We're not." Spring came slower that year. The snow melted in fits, leaving behind thick patches of mud and ice across the land. The trees budded reluctantly, their branches stretching out like the hands of tired men reaching for hope they no longer trusted. Yet, inside the cabin at the edge of the valley, there was something quietly blooming. Something harder to name than spring, but far more enduring. Thomas carved notches into the cabin's frame, one for each day without trouble. The marks stretched. Farther now, unbroken lines that told a story of quiet days, of rebuilt routines. Caleb helped him every morning. The boy had changed, still young, still dreaming, but more deliberate now. He stood taller, carried himself like someone who had earned the right to. Mara moved about the cabin with a quiet presence that filled the walls. She had taken over the hearth, baking bread in the early hours, keeping the fire going, mending blankets, smoothing the girls' hair before they ran outside. She spoke little of what happened in the woods, and Thomas never asked. But every so often, when she thought no one was looking, she would touch her wrist, the place where Shepard once gripped her hard enough to bruise. Her fingers would hover there as if confirming the absence of chains. They had not seen another soul in 3 weeks, until the smoke rose again. It was different this time, thicker, darker, rising not from a fire kept for warmth, but from a blaze meant to destroy. Caleb spotted it first from the ridge while checking snares. He returned breathless, eyes wide. North Ridge. Someone's burning the Fletcher farm. Thomas's blood turned cold. The Fletchers lived 10 miles up. If smoke was rising, it meant someone had gone looking for them and left nothing behind. Mara was already gathering the girls inside. Thomas checked his rifle, loaded both pistols, and handed Caleb a bow. "No heroics. If something happens, take them and run." "I can fight," Caleb said. "You can survive," Thomas replied. "That's more important." Outside, the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows through the trees. The silence returned. Not the peaceful kind, but the thick, tense quiet that preceded violence. That night, the knock came. 3 raps. Firm. No attempt to hide. Thomas opened the door to a figure he didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in ash. The man wore a badge bent, tarnished, on a leather vest soaked with soot. His face was streaked with sweat and dirt, and his eyes were hollow. "I'm looking for a woman," he said. "Name of Mara, traveling with 3 young girls." Thomas didn't flinch. "You won't find her here." The man looked past him into the cabin. "We found what was left of her husband's place, burned out. We figure she ran. She's got something that doesn't belong to her." "What's that?" Thomas asked. "A secret." From behind him, Mara stepped into the doorway. Her face was calm, composed. "Who sent you?" she asked. The man hesitated. "Doesn't matter. What matters is who comes next." Thomas tightened his grip on the rifle. "You're not Law," he said. "No," the man replied. "But the ones coming are worse. You think Shepard was a demon? He was just a tongue. The ones behind him, they're the teeth." He turned, spitting into the snow. "You've got 2 days, maybe less." And then he walked off into the woods, disappearing without a sound. That night, Mara told Thomas everything. She had run from more than just a cruel husband. Shepard had belonged to something bigger, a sect hiding beneath the guise of holiness, a fractured militia born from the ashes of war. They moved from place to place, scavenging ruins, preaching fire and rebirth, offering shelter to the desperate, and violence to everyone else. Shepard had been a lieutenant. Mara had been his prisoner and for a while his wife. "They believe the old world has to be torn down completely," she said. "They called it cleansing." Thomas listened in silence. Every word painted a darker truth. "They'll come for me," she said. "They'll come for all of us," he corrected. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, only nodded. That night, they didn't sleep. By morning, they had fortified the cabin. Windows shuttered, doors reinforced. They buried supplies in the forest: water, dried meat, extra ammunition. Caleb and the girls practiced an escape route, one that led through a narrow pass behind the ridge. Mara taught the girls how to move, silently, how to hide, how to breathe without sound. Thomas knew what had to be done. They would not win in a standoff, but they could buy time. They could make every second count. The attack came at twilight, a whistle through the trees, then fire, arrows dipped in oil, striking the cabin roof and catching flame. Screams followed, men in patched coats and painted faces shouting scripture as they charged. Thomas stood firm at the porch, firing the rifle, reloading by instinct. One fell, then another. Mara was beside him, pistol raised, each shot finding its mark. Caleb moved the girls to the escape trail, his small frame barely visible in the smoke. An explosion tore through the side of the cabin. They were using dynamite, now, driven by madness, fueled by belief. Inside, the fire caught hold. Flames licked the beams. Smoke thickened. "Go!" Thomas shouted. "I'm not leaving you," Mara cried. He grabbed her wrist, firm. "You have to get them out. They won't stop until you're dead. But if they think I'm all that's left, maybe they'll follow." A long pause. Her breath hitched. "I won't let you die for me," she said. "You're not dying," he said. "You're living, for them." Another explosion shook the ground. Mara leaned in, kissed his forehead once quick and fierce, and ran. Thomas stayed. He emptied the rifle, then the pistol. Flames surrounded him now. The cabin groaned. Shadows flitted past the windows. He saw their eyes. Wild, fanatic. He made one final run. Out the front door, through the smoke, straight into the trees, drawing them after him. They followed. 10 of them. Screaming curses, chanting. He led them toward the gorge, where he had buried the explosives, just as Mara suggested. Where the snow was packed thin and the ice uncertain, he dove, rolled, and struck the match. The earth cracked. Flame erupted. Snow and dirt and men were thrown into the sky. Then, silence. It took Mara 2 days to return to the clearing. The cabin was gone. Nothing but blackened beams and scorched trees. She found Caleb and the girls at the old Fletcher barn, where they'd hidden with supplies. Together, they buried what was left of Thomas. A boot, a scrap of coat, a tin locket he'd kept in his pocket, filled with a lock of his wife's hair. Mara carved his name into a flat stone and placed it by the river bank. Years passed. The valley healed. New trees grew where the fire had burned. Mara built a new home, higher on the ridge, safer. She taught her daughters to track, to fish, to read the sky. Caleb stayed with them, strong and capable, until he left for the town one spring to join the marshal's force. On the first snowfall of every winter, Mara walked to the riverbank. She stood there, staring out into the woods, where the smoke had once risen and the fire had taken what she could never repay. He had taken her in when she had nothing, and in return, he had given everything. One day, as she knelt to place wildflowers at his grave, her youngest daughter tugged at her coat. "Ma," she whispered. "Who was he, really?" Mara looked at the girl's eyes, wide, curious, unscarred. "He was a man," she said. "But he was also a miracle." The wind stirred the trees. The river moved slowly. In the quiet, it almost sounded like a voice. Familiar, steady, and brave. Some miracles don't come like lightning. Some walk in quietly, build a fire, and give you back the pieces of yourself you thought were gone forever. CTA. Fade to black. Soft music swells. Narrator, voiceover. In the harshest winters, it isn't always the strongest who survive, but those who find strength in others. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of resilience, sacrifice, and the hidden heroes of forgotten times.